the secret he never knew. He stormed into the hospital to face his enemy, but froze in shock, the woman he left, the child he never knew existed, and in that moment, everything he thought he had lost was standing right in front of him. Could he ever make things right, or has fate already decided? Chicago never slept. The city thrummed with neon lights and the quiet hum of danger in every alleyway. Beneath the surface, the underworld moved like a well-oiled machine, rolled by fear, blood, and a name whispered with both respect and terror: Alexander Hale. At 26, he was already a legend. Blue-eyed, lean, and impossibly composed, Alexander moved through his city like a predator in the shadows. Everyone knew better than to cross him, yet few truly understood him. His calm, his intelligence, his cold precision, these were the weapons he wielded like extensions of his own body. He didn't believe in love, not in loyalty, not in fate, not in mercy. Those were luxuries for the weak. Power was all that mattered. Power and control. Anything else was a distraction he could not afford, and yet, in the quiet corners of his penthouse, in the rare moments when the world stopped making demands, a memory flickered, a memory he had buried deep, like a wound that refused to heal. But it wasn't enough to weaken him. He had trained himself to ignore it. He had trained himself to forget, until the phone rang. The sound was sharp and jarring against the hum of the city below. Alexander's hand moved instinctively, gripping the sleek black receiver as if it were a weapon. The voice on the other end was calm, almost casual, yet it carried a weight that made the world tilt for a moment. "Your enemy survived the hit," the voice said. There was no hesitation, no flourish, just the cold, precise delivery of truth. "He's in St. Alden Hospital. If you want answers, go now." The line went dead. Alexander's chest didn't pound, but his mind ignited. The enemy, the one who had betrayed him, tried to take his empire, tried to humiliate the Hale name. It was alive. He should have felt satisfaction. He should have felt relief. Instead, a shadow of something else brushed against his chest, a flicker of caution, of something he hadn't felt in years. The city outside blurred past as Alexander stepped into the waiting black sedan. His men followed silently, eyes trained on the streets like hawks. Not a word was spoken. Orders were unnecessary. He was in control, as always. But tonight, control felt fragile. The hospital was quiet, deceptively quiet. Emergency lights blinked softly, casting long, thin shadows across the sterile floors. Alexander's boots echoed against the tiles as he moved, every step measured, deliberate. His eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. Instincts honed by years of survival told him danger could erupt from anywhere. And yet, a strange unease crept into his chest, a sensation he hadn't permitted himself to feel in over 5 years. 5 years ago, he had buried something deeper than hatred, something personal. Something dangerous to his carefully constructed life. He had learned, the hard way, that vulnerability was fatal. Emotions were fatal. And love could kill faster than any gun. He shook the thought from his mind. Tonight wasn't about past mistakes. Tonight was about survival, about power, about claiming what was owed. The enemy, cornered, trapped, and vulnerable, would answer for everything. That was certain. Alexander moved down the hospital's dim hallway, every sense alert. The smell of antiseptic and faint iron from old medical equipment mingled with the lingering scent of fear. He expected tension, perhaps resistance. He expected confrontation, maybe even violence. But he did not expect the tremor that suddenly shot through him. A silhouette appeared at the far end of the hallway, half shadow, half light. At first, his mind registered nothing. The figure was still, quiet, almost fragile against the stark hospital walls. And then recognition hit him with the force of a bullet. It was her, Elena Carter, the woman he had loved in secret, the woman he had lost, the woman whose memory he had tried to erase from every corner of his mind. She stood there, her posture straight, elegant, unyielding, every inch the woman she had become, but still carrying the subtle, undeniable echoes of the girl he once knew. Time had not softened her presence. It had sharpened it. Every movement, every tilt of her head reminded him of a world he had left behind. A world where he had allowed himself to feel. A world where he had let her in. And then walked away. Alexander's pulse quickened. Not with fear, not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Regret. A feeling he had sworn never to indulge. His hand twitched toward the gun at his hip, but it felt heavy, foreign. He wanted answers, revenge, control, but suddenly, nothing mattered except that one figure in the dim light. She noticed him. Her gaze, sharp and unyielding, met his. There was no warmth, no recognition in her eyes, only caution, strength, and something darker. A warning, a challenge, a silent accusation of every mistake he had ever made. Alexander froze. The world narrowed to that one moment, that one woman, that one reminder of everything he had lost and everything he had risked by walking away. The gun in his hand felt redundant. His power, his reputation, his city, they all seemed irrelevant. He had bargained with fate countless times, but now fate had bargained with him and he wasn't sure he wanted to win. And then, just as he stepped forward, ready to demand explanations or apologies, ready to confront the past he had buried, a faint sound caught his attention. A child's cry, not far away. Delicate, fragile, unmistakable, his mind raced. A child, and his mind refused to ignore the implication. The silhouette didn't move, didn't speak, but the faint curve of a small arm holding onto her side revealed everything he hadn't expected. The life he never knew existed, the consequence of choices made in arrogance and blind ambition. Alexander's chest tightened. His blue eyes, usually so cold and piercing, blurred with something he could not name: shock, disbelief, a faint flicker of fear. For the first time in years, Alexander Hale felt powerless, and as he took another step, moving closer, trying to convince himself this was some cruel illusion, the woman turned slightly, and the child's gaze caught his. Icy blue eyes, his world stopped. All the answers he had come for, all the revenge he had plotted, all the plans he had made for control and power, none of it mattered anymore. He had entered the hospital to face an enemy. Instead, he had stumbled straight into a past he thought he had destroyed, and a future he had never anticipated. Alexander's hand froze mid-step. Elena slowly lifted her head, eyes narrowing, not with recognition, not with warmth, but with a question he couldn't answer. And in that silence, the child in her arms whispered a single word, a word that pierced Alexander's carefully armored heart. Papa. Chicago streets at night were a different kind of battlefield. Neon lights flickered over cracked sidewalks, graffiti-stained walls, and rain-slicked alleys. Alexander Hale had learned early that the city demanded two things: respect and fear. He had both in spades. Every rival, every thug, every pawn in the underworld recognized his presence without question. Yet there was one memory that had always eluded control, one person he could not intimidate, manipulate, or dominate. Her name was Elena Carter. She was nothing like the women who surrounded the Mafia world. No shallow ambitions, no calculating smiles. Sharp-minded, fiercely independent, with a gaze that could pierce through the most carefully built facades, she was a force of nature disguised in elegance. She had wit and fire, and Alexander, even in his early years, knew she was a danger to his heart. They shouldn't have fallen for each other, cousins by blood, enemies by circumstance. Their families had built invisible walls of loyalty and obligation. His world was filled with violence, betrayal, and death lurking in every corner. Hers was shaped by expectation, inheritance, and a careful cultivation of reputation. Together, they were reckless. Together, they were dangerous. And yet, that danger only made the pull stronger. They met in borrowed moments, in quiet corners of sprawling mansions, in shadowed hotel lounges where no one dared to enter, in rain-drenched streets where confessions came easier than smiles. Each glance, each fleeting touch left a mark. No one saw it, no one understood it, and Alexander, ever vigilant, tried to ignore it, but ignoring Elena was impossible. It began small. A shared laugh over a careless remark, a hand brushing against his in passing, a conversation that lingered too long. Every encounter was like a spark near gunpowder, subtle, nearly imperceptible at first, but capable of an explosion. Slowly, it consumed him. His thoughts, his decisions, his careful plans, they all bent toward her. Every strategy he built for power was secretly colored by her smile, her laugh, the way her hair fell over her eyes in the sunlight. Alexander's control, absolute in every other area of his life, faltered around her. And Elena, too, felt the shift. She noticed the tension behind his calm, the flash of vulnerability beneath his precision. She recognized the man he could be if he allowed himself to feel not the feared Mafia king, but a human who wanted more than power. It was in love at first sight. It was gradual, almost imperceptible, like a shadow stretching across the floor. One day, he realized that he could not walk past her without feeling a pull, a tug at something he didn't want to name. And she realized that no one had ever looked at her the way he did, intensely, carefully, like he could see every secret inside her heart and still choose to stay. And yet, danger never slept. Their meetings were risky. Family politics were ruthless, and a single misstep could ruin them both. Alexander's enemies were everywhere, and his own ambitions often demanded sacrifices. Elena's life, carefully structured and fortified, would be destroyed if anyone discovered the depths of their connection. Still, the pull was stronger than the fear. Still, they met. One night, rain streaking the streets like liquid silver, they found themselves alone in a narrow alley behind a closed cafe. The city hummed around them, oblivious to the storm inside their small, shared world. Elena's eyes reflected something Alexander had long denied: hope, longing, trust. If you walk into the dark, she whispered, her voice low, trembling almost imperceptibly, you'll lose me in it. Alexander froze. He had heard this warning before, in echoes of instinct and in the quiet of his own conscience. The dark wasn't just the Mafia world, the blood, the violence, it was him. And she understood it. She understood that he carried a storm inside him, one that could consume anything he touched. Yet he did not turn away. The city outside seemed to vanish. Only her words remained, fragile and potent, like a thread stretched across a chasm. He wanted to stay. He wanted to hold her, to promise her the world and bend the shadows for her sake. But Alexander Hale had built his life on control, on fear, and on cold, unflinching logic. Love, vulnerability, consequences, these were luxuries he could not afford. He stepped back, hard, measured. He would not allow himself to be human. Not now, not ever, not when the world demanded a monster. I'll find my way, he said, voice low, almost cruel in its restraint. Don't follow me. And he walked away. Every step he took was heavy, burdened with the weight of what he had left behind. Elena's gaze followed him, burning with frustration, pain, and something else, something Alexander refused to acknowledge even to himself. He didn't look back, but the silence behind him was deafening. For days after, he could not forget the curve of her smile, the way her voice had trembled, the intensity in her eyes. His enemies didn't keep him awake at night. Deals didn't haunt his dreams. It was her, always her. Elena, meanwhile, forced herself to move on. She buried her longing beneath ambition and determination. She focused on family, business, and reputation. But every plan, every triumph, was haunted by the ghost of the man she shouldn't have loved. Years passed, and life carried them both into separate orbits. Yet the memory of that night, the warning, the fire, the risk lingered like a scar. Alexander became more ruthless, more feared. Elena became stronger, more untouchable. Both became legends in their own right, but the one thread neither could sever was the connection that had begun in stolen moments and impossible love. And now, after all this time, fate had a way of bringing what was buried back to the surface. Alexander had walked into the hospital to confront an enemy. He had expected betrayal, violence, perhaps death. But the memory of Elena, of the one woman who had ever made him feel human, was a force he could not escape. And something deep in him knew that this encounter would not be just a collision with the enemy, it would be a collision with everything he had tried to bury. As he rounded a corner of the hospital corridor, the door to a private room swung open. A faint light spilled out, and there she was, Elena, standing as if the years had never passed. Only this time, her hand rested gently on the shoulder of a small boy whose eyes mirrored Alexander's own. He froze, heart thundering in his chest. And then, in a quiet, trembling voice that cut deeper than any bullet ever could, Elena said, "Alexander, we need to talk." The rain fell in silver threads across the city, turning the streets of Chicago into rivers of reflection. Neon signs shimmered on wet asphalt, painting the world in reds and blues. But inside the quiet suite of a secluded hotel, a different kind of storm brewed. Alexander Hale, the city's most feared and brilliant mafia boss, stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing at the skyline. His hands rested on the ledge, fingers flexing, as if the steel of his own will wasn't enough to restrain the chaos within. The city below did not matter, not tonight. Tonight, the world outside, with its violence, betrayals, and deals, could wait. Elena Carter sat across the room, quiet, composed, yet trembling slightly under the weight of anticipation. Her hands were clasped tightly on her lap. In the shadows, her sharp eyes followed every move he made. She could read him better than anyone else. She had always been able to, and that truth both terrified and comforted her. They had come here not for extravagance, not for ceremony, but for themselves. Alone, apart from the judgment of family, the eyes of the world, the chains of expectation. This was a marriage of necessity and desire, of defiance and fragile hope. Neither had spoken vows aloud. Words felt inadequate, dangerous even, in a life built on silence and secrets. Instead, they had pledged themselves quietly, in glances, in small gestures, in the certainty that if the world tried to tear them apart, they would hold firm. For a fleeting moment, Elena allowed herself to believe. Maybe he could be hers. Maybe the Alexander who walked into dark alleys, who commanded armies and negotiated death for sport, could also be the man who kept her safe. A man who could shield her from the cruelty of the world. Alexander, for his part, believed he could protect her. He believed that holding her close, breathing the same air, feeling the same pulse would somehow make him invincible. He believed that love, fragile though it was, could exist alongside power and violence, but love in their world was fragile, a candle flickering against a hurricane. Outside the hotel, shadows of rivals and opportunists circled like predators. Deals were being struck, threats whispered, secrets passed in the dead of night. Every choice Alexander made to protect Elena pulled him deeper into the trap of his own empire. Every step toward her safety exposed him to new dangers. Elena could sense the tension coiled within him, the moments when his jaw tightened, the nights he returned later than he promised, the fleeting shadow in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. She knew the world he ruled. She knew the cost of staying close to a man like him. And yet, she stayed, even in the silence of the night, when the city hummed faintly through the hotel walls. Danger whispered. Footsteps outside the door, the faint crackle of a radio in another room, the subtle vibration of Alexander's phone. It was all a reminder that the peace they had carved was temporary. They spoke little that night, but every glance, every touch, every sigh communicated volumes. Their hands brushed over the table. His eyes lingered on hers, searching for affirmation, for a reason to hope. Elena returned his gaze with equal intensity, but beneath the surface, her mind churned. She wondered if hope was foolish, if love was a weapon that could be wielded as easily against them as for them. Hours passed, the night deepening, yet neither moved to leave. Alexander finally broke the silence, his voice low, deliberate. "Tonight, it's just us. No world, no enemies. No mistakes, Elena nodded, but her mind was already half on the city beyond these walls. She knew that safety was an illusion in their lives. Still, she allowed herself a rare indulgence being close to him, even knowing it could all crumble in the morning. For the first time in years, Alexander allowed himself to imagine a life beyond violence, a life where they woke together, where the city's chaos remained distant. He imagined waking to her face, hearing her laugh without fear, watching her grow strong under his protection rather than under the shadow of threats. But fate is never so generous. A single phone call shattered their fragile world. Alexander's phone buzzed insistently. He answered without looking at the screen. The voice on the line was smooth, cold, dangerous. "Alexander Hale," the voice said. "I have an opportunity that will make you untouchable. $1 billion stakes, influence across continents. But you can't have it if you stay where you are." Alexander froze. The words landed like lead. Every ambition he had, every plan he had ever executed, suddenly demanded a choice. Power or love, wealth or hope, influence or the fragile sanctuary he had built with Elena. He turned slowly to her. Elena's expression mirrored the tension inside him. She knew, without a word, what the call meant. She had seen the calculation in his eyes, the conflict in his jaw. She had seen him make impossible decisions before, and she had lived through the aftermath. Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. The lines between loyalty, ambition, and desire blurred. He could hear the city outside, the heartbeat of Chicago's underworld, pulling him back into the darkness he had tried to escape. He could hear the whispers of rivals, the contracts that waited, the blood debts that demanded repayment, and he could see Elena, her fragile hope, her unwavering strength, the life they might have if he chose differently. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Every second was a drumbeat of consequence. Every choice carried weight beyond imagining. Elena finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with fear. "You can take the deal. You can take the world. But if you do, you'll lose me. You'll lose this life, us, everything we've built together." Alexander's eyes met hers, and for a long moment neither spoke. His mind raced, weighing ambitions against the woman he loved. He had always been ruthless, but now ruthlessness carried a cost he had never faced before. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with the pressure of decision. Outside, Chicago's lights glimmered, indifferent to human emotion. Inside, two hearts balanced on the edge of an impossible choice. Alexander's thumb hovered over the call, and he hesitated. Every instinct screamed to take the deal, to secure power and control. Every memory, every heartbeat, every pulse of love he had ever felt screamed to stay. Elena's hand reached for his, tentative, trembling. "You're not just choosing a deal," she whispered. "You're choosing whether I stay or leave." The weight of her words struck him harder than any bullet ever could. He pressed the phone to his ear and spoke, his voice low, deadly, yet tinged with something foreign uncertainty. I need time, a luxury he rarely allowed himself. But the truth was, there was no time. Every second delayed meant the world outside continued to demand his attention, his ruthlessness, his sacrifice. And somewhere, lurking beyond the city lights, was the force that would ensure this choice could never be simple. Elena's eyes searched his. They held anger, fear, and a glimmer of hope. But even she knew that in the underworld, hope was fragile. As Alexander ended the call and set the phone down, the room seemed to grow smaller, heavier. The future he had imagined with her now hung by a thread. The life they had briefly touched, the sanctuary of stolen hours. The fragile hope of love it could vanish with the dawn, and then, as if the universe had waited for the exact moment to strike, a second call buzzed through, insistent, urgent, impossible to ignore. Alexander answered, and the voice was calm, authoritative, terrifying in its precision. "Alexander Hale, we've finalized the deal, but it comes with a condition. You cannot remain married to her if you accept." Time froze. Elena's hand fell from his, her face pale but defiant. Alexander's jaw tightened. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on him like the city itself. He had ruled with power and fear. He had commanded the streets and bent men to his will. Yet here, in this quiet room, love and ambition collided, and there was no strategy, no calculation that could save him. Alexander's gaze fell on Elena, her eyes shimmering with a mix of anger and heartbreak, and he realized the cost of ambition could not be measured in money or influence. It was measured in the hearts he would break, and in that moment, he knew. Accepting the deal meant walking away from the only person who had ever truly held him. His hand hovered over the phone, trembling for the first time in his life. Would he choose power or the fragile hope of love? The city had a way of swallowing people whole. One day, you moved through the streets like a king, untouchable and powerful. The next, you vanished, leaving only shadows and echoes. Alexander Hale had mastered this art. Leaving was never a problem for him. Staying, especially when hearts were involved, was a danger he refused to risk, and so he left. No explanations, no apologies, no backward glance to see if she was watching, waiting, crying. He disappeared from her life the way smoke slips through fingers, silent, cold, and absolute. For Alexander, it was simple, a necessary sacrifice. For Elena, it was devastation carved into the core of her being. The first night alone, she wandered the empty apartment they had shared for brief months, running her fingers over the edges of things he had touched. Everything smelled of him, his cologne, the faint scent of his shirts, the echo of his footsteps in the hallway. She hated him for leaving, and yet, in the quiet of the night, a part of her hated herself more for missing him. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and in the quiet moments before dawn, Elena discovered a secret that would alter everything she had left in the wake of his absence. She was pregnant. The realization hit her like a hammer to her chest, her body carrying the living consequence of the man who had walked away without a second thought. For hours, she sat on the edge of the bed, her hands pressed to her stomach. She whispered to herself, low and trembling, he wouldn't have stayed. Even for this, her voice broke against the walls of the empty room. She imagined him walking through the door, claiming her, apologizing, promising everything, but the reality was brutal. Alexander had left. He had chosen ambition, power, his empire over her, over the life they had almost shared. Her tears came silently, and when they stopped, a new resolve hardened in their place. She would not fall apart. She would not become a victim of abandonment. Alexander may have left her, but he could not destroy her. Not now, not ever. Elena began a meticulous process of erasure. She cleared her digital footprints, moved out of the city, changed departments, and created a new life far from the reach of the Hale syndicate. Every letter she burned, every photo she hid or shredded, every trace of her existence tied to Alexander was destroyed. She became invisible, a ghost, a woman with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Pregnancy alone was its own battle. She endured every sleepless night, every sharp pang, every moment of fear that she might be caught or found. Her body changed, but so did her mind. Where fear had once lingered, a steel resolve took root. She promised herself that this child would grow into a world where love was a choice, not a weapon. Where strength came from within, not from reliance on a man who had abandoned her. Elena's work began almost immediately. Small investments, secret accounts, careful networking. She built herself from fragments of the life she had lost, stronger than she had been before. Every day was deliberate, every step calculated. She refused to rely on anyone, not family, not friends, not Alexander. At night, she imagined what the future could be if she succeeded. Not revenge, not bitterness, but control. Control over her own life, her own destiny. She imagined walking back into the city one day, not as the abandoned girl, not as the powerless woman, but as someone untouchable. Someone Alexander could not ignore. Yet even as she built her fortress of independence, the memory of Alexander lingered. Not as a tormentor, but as a ghost of what could have been. She hated that he had the power to haunt her thoughts, and yet she admitted, quietly, that part of her had never stopped loving him. Months passed, and her body and mind grew stronger in tandem. She learned to navigate the dangerous waters of Chicago's business world with the same caution and precision that Alexander had mastered. She learned to negotiate, to anticipate threats, to wield influence like a weapon. Every meeting, every handshake, every carefully calculated decision reminded her that she was no longer the girl who had depended on him, and yet, the world has a way of circling back to those it tries to bury. One evening, as she sat in her new apartment overlooking the distant glow of the city, Elena felt a shift, a whisper of destiny, a subtle nudge that the life she had constructed in solitude was about to intersect with the man who had shattered it. She clenched her fists, her mind sharp, her resolve absolute. The fire that had been smoldering inside her all these months roared to life. "When I return," she whispered, her voice cold and unwavering. "I won't return weak." The words were not a promise to herself alone, they were a warning. To Alexander, to the world, to anyone who thought they could underestimate her. Elena's eyes glimmered with determination as she envisioned the confrontation to come. She had grown, she had strengthened, and she had learned to survive without him. And yet, deep in her chest, a part of her feared the inevitable collision with the man who had taken everything from her. She had survived the abandonment, the heartbreak, the isolation. She had molded herself into someone no one could touch. Yet the thought of Alexander Hale walking back into her life, powerful, unrepentant, and dangerous, sent a shiver down her spine. Every plan, every strategy, every ounce of strength she had amassed was being prepared for the day they would meet again. She did not yet know when or under what circumstances, but she understood one thing with crystal clarity. The man who had left her in ruins would one day face the woman who had risen from them, and the world would tremble under the weight of that encounter. A faint knock echoed through her apartment. Elena's hand instinctively went to her heart as she turned toward the door. Through the peephole, a figure stood silhouetted in the dim light. Not just any figure, the presence radiated danger, power, and inevitability. Elena's breath caught. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, almost a curse, "It's him." The figure pressed the doorbell again. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that her carefully built world was about to collide with the man who had broken everything. Elena Carter had long learned the language of survival. She had transformed grief into power, loss into precision, and betrayal into strategy. The woman who had once curled into herself after Alexander's departure was gone, replaced by someone sharper, untouchable, and unyielding. Every brick of her empire was laid with intention, each one a testament to the life she had forced herself to build alone. Her child was her anchor, her reminder that even in solitude, life demanded strength. Raising him had been a lesson in resilience. Sleepless nights, constant vigilance, whispered fears, she had endured them all because the alternative was surrender. And surrender was not an option. Chicago had come to know her name, though few dared to speak it aloud. In the Mafia's shadows, whispers of Elena Carter carried respect and a hint of fear. She had become more than a survivor. She had become a force. Men who had once underestimated her now calculated their steps, knowing that underestimating her could be deadly. On a rainy evening, the city's streets glistened with the sheen of water. The rhythmic patter of rain against the car windows was a sound Elena had once found soothing. Tonight, however, it was a warning. Her son, seated in the back seat, laughed softly, holding a small toy, unaware of the danger that lurked in the world outside. Elena's focus was absolute, her hands tight on the wheel, the screech of tires, the flash of headlights in the rearview mirror, and then, chaos. A sudden impact threw her son forward, the toy clattering to the wet asphalt. Elena's heart skipped. Time slowed. Her vision tunneled. She leapt from the car, rain soaking her hair and coat, and cradled her child in her arms. The world around her dissolved the rain. The city lights, the chaos, everything focused on him. Breathing, trembling, a small life that depended entirely on her. Her car lay twisted, the collision leaving sharp edges of metal glinting in the streetlights. But there was no time to assess the damage. Only one thought propelled her forward: getting him to the hospital. St. Alden Hospital loomed through the rain, its fog familiar yet menacing in the pale light. Elena's pace quickened, her leather boots splashing through puddles as she pushed open the doors. The sterile smell of antiseptic hit her immediately, but she barely registered it. All that mattered was her son's fragile body in her arms, the rapid rise and fall of his chest, and the blood pounding in her ears. A nurse rushed to her side, her eyes wide with professional urgency. Elena's voice was low but fierce as she barked instructions, her command cutting through the chaos like a blade. "He's in shock. Stabilize him. Fast!" Doctors and nurses moved around her in a blur. Machines beeped, monitors flashed. Elena hovered over her son, hands trembling only slightly, heart pounding as she absorbed every detail of his condition. She had spent years building her empire, negotiating, strategizing, manipulating people who believed themselves untouchable, but nothing had ever prepared her for this raw, terrifying helplessness. The doctor's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "His vitals are unstable. He needs monitoring tonight." Intensive monitoring. Elena froze, the words hanging in the air like a guillotine suspended above her heart. She swallowed hard, forcing control over the panic clawing at her chest. Monitoring tonight? The world outside seemed to fade into a haze. Her mind raced through contingencies, through every possible scenario. But there was one thought she could not escape: the hospital. Her son's fragile life had brought her back to St. Alden, the same place Alexander Hale had walked toward. The hospital corridors she had once avoided, haunted by memories she had buried, now seemed alive with invisible threads, pulling fate into motion. Elena's eyes scanned the sterile walls, the monitors, the white uniforms of staff moving with practiced efficiency. She felt it before she could see it. The presence, the weight of a man who could change everything in an instant. Alexander Hale. The thought struck like lightning, not just as a memory, but as an imminent reality. Every instinct screamed at her to brace herself. Years of separation, power gained, walls built around her heart, all of it would be tested in moments. The woman who had once been abandoned, who had once wept silently in her apartment, now stood ready, a silent storm behind her eyes. She would not crumble, not now, not in front of him. Her son's tiny hand curled around hers. The fragile life she had nurtured, protected, and fought for now tied her to the coming storm. The child was unaware of the tension crackling in the air, the collision of two lives that destiny had carefully choreographed. Elena's breath quickened. She adjusted her grip, straightened her posture, and prepared herself for whatever was about to unfold. She had spent years becoming untouchable, and she would not falter, and yet, deep inside, a flicker of fear remained. Fear not of violence, not of betrayal, but of the man who had once ruled her heart, the man who had walked away and left her to endure the consequences alone. The hospital corridors stretched before her, white and unending. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat in her chest. Every flicker of light seemed to pulse with tension. Somewhere ahead, fate awaited. Then, a shadow at the far end of the hall caught her eye. A tall, commanding figure moving with the precision of a predator. Even in the sterile hospital light, the aura of danger and authority radiated unmistakably. Alexander Hale, the man she had not seen in years but whose presence had never left her. Her pulse quickened, her grip on her son tightened. The years of preparation, strength, and independence she had built surged through her veins, ready to face the collision. Yet even as she steeled herself, a part of her wondered how she could stand against the storm that had once shattered her completely. A nurse approached, her expression grave. "He's here, in the hallway. You need to stay back, ma'am." "But I think you already know who I mean." Elena froze. Rain streaked across the hospital windows, reflecting neon lights from the city outside. Her blue eyes narrowed, and she whispered under her breath, a mixture of defiance and dread. So it begins. In that moment, every step Alexander took toward her would be one toward confrontation, redemption, and consequences she had spent years preparing for, but nothing could have readied her for what was about to come. Alexander Hale moved through the hospital corridors like a shadow cast in steel and intent. Every step was measured, silent, precise. He had come expecting an enemy, a man who had defied him, betrayed him, someone to extract answers from, someone to end or intimidate. But the air tonight was different. Heavy, electric, unforgiving. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting intermittent shadows that stretched across the polished floors. He paused at each turn, scanning the hallways with eyes that had learned to see every threat before it arrived. Every instinct screamed danger, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that would finally arrest his steps. She stood there, Elena Carter. Years of absence had not softened her. They had sharpened her. Every line of her jaw, every angle of her cheek, every flicker in her gaze told a story of survival, strength, and relentless determination. The girl he had once loved was gone, replaced by a woman who radiated power and control, untouchable, untamed, irresistible in the most dangerous way. And then his eyes fell to the boy beside her. Time froze in a heartbeat. The child looked up, and Alexander's world tilted. Those piercing blue eyes, the same shade as his own, locked onto him with innocent curiosity and startling recognition. Blood, unmistakable and undeniable, surged through him. His son, his consequence, his living reminder that choices had weight, that absence left scars, that love could wound deeper than any bullet. Alexander's chest tightened. Words, plans, control, all useless here. The boy was a mirror of himself, fragile yet indelibly tied to the life he had left behind. The calculations that had governed his empire, his reputation, his life, shattered in an instant under the weight of this reality. Elena's gaze fixed on him, cold and precise. Eyes cut sharper than any blade. "Walk away, Alexander," she said, her voice a weapon tempered with grief and fury. Every syllable carried the weight of years he had spent absent, every pause a reminder of the nights she had endured alone, every whisper a warning. He took a step forward, cautious, tentative. "Elena," but she held up a hand, stopping him before words could escape. She did not step aside. She did not falter. The woman standing before him was a fortress, the mother of his child, someone who had survived his betrayal, and the brutal city around them was unbroken, immovable, and unyielding. Her son clung to her side, small hand gripping her coat. Alexander's instincts screamed to move closer, to reach out, to claim what he had lost. But the rules had changed. She was no longer the girl who had waited for him blindly. She was the woman who had learned to survive without him, and she would not allow him to hurt her again. The room seemed to constrict around them. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the faint hum of hospital machines, the soft shuffle of nurses' footsteps, it all faded into the background. Only the three of them existed in this narrow corridor of tension and history. Alexander struggled to form words. Guilt, regret, longing, fear, all tangled inside him like a storm ready to break. Every empire he had built, every decision he had made to become untouchable, every plan to dominate Chicago's underworld, none of it mattered now. His son mattered. Elena mattered. The life he had walked away from mattered. Elena's eyes never wavered. She was the calm eye of a hurricane, and she knew the power she wielded over him. He wanted to explain, to apologize, to reclaim time that had long passed, but the truth was, explanations could not undo the past. Only action could determine the future, and right now, the future was fragile. The silence stretched, oppressive and thick. Alexander could feel it pressing in, a tangible weight on his chest. Every second he delayed, every hesitation, only deepened the tension. He had been prepared for confrontation, for power plays, for negotiations. but nothing in his life had prepared him for this collision of consequence and love. Then, breaking through the frozen moment, a sudden alarm rang out, a nurse rushing toward them, eyes wide with urgency. "Elena, your son's heart rhythm just dropped." The words hit Alexander like a hammer. Time shattered. He lunged forward, hands trembling, mind racing. The mother in Elena reacted instantly, scooping her child into her arms with protective ferocity. Alexander's instincts screamed, but this was no turf war, no assassination attempt. This was far more terrifying. Life hung in the balance. Elena's voice, though strained, carried command. "Stay calm. Help him. Don't panic." Alexander caught himself, struggling to follow orders while fighting the surge of panic and helplessness rising inside him. He had faced death countless times, orchestrated the destruction of rivals, survived betrayal, but watching his own blood flicker on the edge of mortality, standing beside the woman he had once left behind, stripped him of all pretense. He glanced at Elena. Her jaw was set, her hand steady, but the flicker of fear in her eyes betrayed the depth of her concern. She had spent years becoming untouchable, yet nothing could shield a mother from the terror of her child's suffering. The monitors beeped erratically, each sound amplifying the tension in the room. Nurses moved with controlled urgency, but the situation was delicate. One misstep, one delayed action, could tip the balance. Alexander's mind raced through every possible contingency. Every medical procedure he had only vaguely understood from whispered knowledge of the city's elite circles. He realized, painfully, that no amount of power or wealth could shield him here. In this moment, he was as human and vulnerable as anyone else. And the woman in front of him, the one who had been the heart of his youth, the fire of his obsession, was the only one whose presence could anchor him. The boy's tiny fingers flexed in Elena's grasp, and Alexander could not tear his gaze away. The reflection in those piercing blue eyes was undeniable. That child was his blood, his consequence, his tie to a past he had abandoned and a future he desperately wanted to reclaim. The storm outside, the city lights, the rain-soaked streets, it all faded to insignificance. All that remained was the corridor, the child, and the woman who had survived him. Elena's hand brushed against Alexander's arm, brief and tentative, yet filled with meaning. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. They were not the same people they had been, but the threads of connection remained, fragile yet unbroken. Then the alarm escalated, a shrill, insistent warning from the monitor. The boy's chest rose and fell unevenly. Every second felt stretched to eternity. Alexander's chest tightened. Elena's eyes widened, a flash of fear that mirrored his own. The nurse's voice cut through the tension, urgent and commanding. "Get him into the EQ now. He won't stabilize here." Alexander's heart thudded in his chest. Every instinct screamed to act, to intervene, to do whatever it took to save his son. And yet, he knew he had to trust Elena, had to step into a world of vulnerability he had long avoided. For a moment, the world held its breath. Rain streaked down the hospital windows, neon light refracting across their faces. Father, mother, child, the three of them frozen in a heartbeat that could tip toward life or disaster. As the ICU door swung open, Alexander caught Elena's gaze. The words on her lips were barely audible, but they carried weight heavier than any weapon. "Don't lose him, or you'll lose everything, Alexander." The monitor beeped a warning again, the sound sharp, insistent, echoing like fate itself. In that instant, Alexander realized that saving his son and reclaiming a life he had abandoned would demand more than power, more than strategy. It would demand his heart, and for the first time, he feared that even his empire might not be enough. The sterile corridors of Stede Alden Hospital, usually quiet in the late hours, were anything but. Alexander Hale's boots echoed against the polished floor, each step deliberate, controlled, but his mind raced faster than his pace. Security footage flickered across his phone screen, revealing the man he had come to confront escaped from his room, moving with purpose and armed. Alexander's eyes narrowed. The target wasn't just him. The presence of danger here, in this sacred sanctuary, made his instincts flare. Whoever had orchestrated this, whoever had planned this intrusion, had more than revenge on their mind. They were after Elena and his son. His pulse quickened, and the calm, measured aura that cloaked him in the underworld began to crack. Rage, primal and raw, surged. He clenched his fists. Protecting them wasn't optional, it was inevitable. Elena stood a few steps ahead, her posture taut, her sharp gaze meeting his. She did not flinch at the sight of him, but he could see the tension radiating from her. Every line in her body spoke of readiness, of defense, of fear carefully contained. "Where is he?" Alexander demanded, voice low but deadly, his eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "I don't know." Her refusal ignited something inside him, a flash of frustration. He had survived bullets, betrayal, assassins, but right now, the one person who had ever mattered to him was standing mere feet away, withholding the truth. His instincts screamed at him to tear down the walls, to force answers, but he paused, her voice, calm yet icy, cut through his storm. "Trust died the day you left." The words landed like bullets, sharp and final. Guilt flared within him, a familiar, suffocating weight. He had left, abandoned her, and now every measure of control he had built in his empire could not undo that betrayal, yet something in her posture, in the subtle tightening of her hands around their son, shifted his focus. It wasn't fear for herself, it was fear for the boy. Alexander's chest tightened, awareness sharpening. Every instinct told him that protecting his child was now absolute, non-negotiable. He stepped closer, voice softer but still commanding. "Elena, I need you to tell me everything." No lies. She met his gaze, unwavering, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. Her eyes flicked toward their son, tiny and fragile in her arms, a living reminder of what they were fighting for. Alexander understood her priorities, her fear, her careful calculation, all revolved around him. The corridor seemed to shrink, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a warning drumbeat. The air was thick with unspoken words and imminent danger. Alexander had faced death countless times, but this was different here. Stakes were human, and every misstep could be catastrophic. Elena's hand tightened over the child, protective, unyielding. Alexander could see the truth. She had become untouchable not for herself, but for him, for their son. A sudden noise echoed down the hall, metal scraping, footsteps too fast, too deliberate. Alexander's instincts flared again. "Elena," he said, voice low and urgent, "stay close to him. Don't move until I say." She didn't argue. Her jaw set, eyes fixed ahead, but she did not falter. Her fear had transformed into steel, and Alexander could sense it, respect it, but also fear for her courage. Then, as if time itself had paused, a gunshot shattered the tense calm. The sound reverberated across the hospital floor, sharp and terrifying. Elena instinctively raised her son, shielding him with her body, while Alexander lunged forward, every muscle coiled, every sense on high alert. The echo of the shot hung in the air, a cruel announcement that the enemy had made their move, and the collision of past, present, and danger had begun. Alexander's eyes met Elena's, both sets wide with shock and adrenaline. No words were needed, the threat was immediate, real, and lethal. The hallway fell silent for a heartbeat, then another shot rang out, closer this time. Alexander's grip tightened on his gun, teeth clenched. He whispered under his breath, voice edged with fury and desperation, "Hold on, I'm coming." The shadow of the enemy moved again in the corridor, invisible yet palpable, and the night stretched into a tense, deadly pause. Panic surged through the hospital like wildfire. Alarms blared, echoing off sterile walls, accompanied by the intermittent flicker of failing lights. Patients and staff scrambled in terror, but Alexander moved with single-minded precision, his senses sharp, attuned to every shadow, every sound. "Elena, stay close," he commanded. voice low, taut with urgency. She obeyed without hesitation, gripping his arm as they sprinted toward the pediatric wing, each step a desperate beat in a symphony of chaos. Glass shattered behind them. Gunmen had infiltrated the building, their footsteps loud, their intentions clear. Bullets ricocheted off walls. Alexander pulled Elena down, pressing her against the wall as rounds cracked through the air. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She had seen the ruthless protector he once was, the man who commanded fear and respect, but now she saw it up close. The man she had once loved, and the man she had hated for abandoning her. Moving with lethal precision to shield her and their son, they darted through hallways, Alexander leading, scanning every corner. Every instinct he had honed over years in the underworld guided him. He was not just running, he was hunting, protecting, preempting every threat before it had a chance to strike. Elena's heart raced, not from fear alone, but from the collision of emotions she could no longer deny. He was both her salvation and the ghost of the past she had tried to bury. Yet right now, right here, he was her only hope. They burst into the pediatric wing, the fluorescent lights above strobing violently. Alexander's gaze swept the room, but it was empty. The bed where her son should have been was gone. Time slowed, heartbeats stretching into eternity. Panic threatened to overwhelm Elena, but Alexander's steady presence grounded her, even as adrenaline surged through her veins. "Where is he?" she demanded, voice trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. Alexander's jaw tightened. His piercing blue eyes narrowed, scanning every exit, every hallway, every shadowed corner. The precision of a predator, the fury of a father. Then, at the far end of the corridor, movement caught his eye. A masked man, tall and deliberate, held a small, fragile figure in his arms. Elena froze. Her son, their son, held at gunpoint, the danger now tangible, immediate, and merciless. Alexander's grip on his firearm tightened. He stepped forward slowly, calculating, every muscle coiled, every thought focused. The child's life depended on precision, control, an instinct honed over years of violence. "Elena," he whispered, voice low, deadly, yet tense. "Stay behind me," she nodded, though terror glimmered in her eyes. This was the man she had loved, the man who had left her, but also the man who could save everything she held dear. The masked figure shifted, tightening his hold on the boy, gun leveled with chilling intent. Every second stretched, every heartbeat thundered like a drum of war. Alexander's mind raced. One wrong move could mean disaster. One wrong word, one hesitation, one misstep could destroy the fragile life in front of him. Elena clutched her son's blanket, silent, torn between panic and trust. She had built herself into someone untouchable, but this moment stripped her bare, leaving only fear and fierce maternal love. The corridor was silent except for the faint hum of the lights, the distant echoes of alarm, and the masked man's steady breathing. Alexander's eyes locked onto the figure, calculating the strike. He could see the fear behind the mask, the tension in the grip, the desperation that masked incompetence. But mistakes could not be afforded. Not here. Not now. The child stirred slightly, tiny fingers reaching toward Alexander instinctively. Time slowed. The world narrowed to 3 people, a gun, and a single, precarious heartbeat. Alexander stepped closer, deliberate, every movement measured, his gaze unblinking, every instinct focused on protecting, on saving, on claiming the life he had once abandoned but would never again let go. The masked man's finger twitched on the trigger. Alexander's voice cut through the silence, low and lethal. "Drop the gun, now." And in that instant, the hallway froze, time, fear, and fate hanging in the balance. Alexander's boots scraped lightly against the polished floor as he stepped forward, deliberate and unflinching. His gun hung loosely at his side, but his hands rose slowly, open, a silent signal of both surrender and strategy. Every nerve in his body was taut, every muscle coiled like a spring. "Elena, stay back," he murmured, his voice low but cutting through the tension like steel. The child's small body was clutched close to Elena, her grip protective, fierce, unwavering. "Let the boy go," Alexander commanded, voice deadly calm. "This is between you and me," the enemy sneered, a twisted mask of rage and vengeance. "You took everything from me. Now I'll take everything from you." Time slowed. The masked figure's finger tightened on the trigger. Alexander's gaze locked onto the glint of the weapon, calculating, anticipating. Every instinct he had honed over years of violence told him the trajectory, the speed, the angle. Then the gun fired, a deafening crack echoed down the corridor. Alexander lunged instinctively, dragging the child into his arms just as the bullet tore across his shoulder. Pain exploded, searing and blinding, but adrenaline overrode everything. Protecting his son became the singular focus, the axis around which his entire being rotated. He collapsed to the floor, blood seeping through his shirt, staining the polished tiles crimson. Every heartbeat was a drumbeat of agony, yet still he shielded the boy, his body a living barrier against danger. Elena dropped beside him, hands trembling uncontrollably, fear and fury warring in her chest. Her nails dug into his arms, and for a heartbeat she feared the worst. Alexander's breaths were shallow, ragged, each one a testament to endurance. He glanced at Elena, eyes glinting with pain and determination. "I couldn't stay then," he whispered, his voice hoarse, almost broken. "But let me stay now." Her tears fell freely, mingling with the rain that had streaked her coat earlier, her grip on her son tightening. The man she had once loved, the man who had left her to survive alone, was here, bleeding, and still standing between her child and death. The enemy faltered for a heartbeat, unsure of the ferocity and desperation in Alexander's stance. And that hesitation was all Alexander needed to hold the boy closer. Every ounce of resolve in his battered body, but the wound, the blood loss, and the sheer strain began to take their toll. The edges of Alexander's vision blurred, the corridor lights flickering as his consciousness wavered. Elena's voice trembled as she called his name, her hands pressing against his chest, her heart hammering with a terror she had not known since she had first held their child. The alarms blared, red lights reflecting off the walls, mixing with the flashing neon from outside. Doctors and nurses swarmed the corridor, urgency in every movement, but Alexander's focus remained singular: his son, Elena, and the enemy who had brought them to this edge. Every second stretched, every breath was a battle, every heartbeat a reminder of the price he had paid for his past sins. The enemy froze, realizing the depth of Alexander's resolve, the way his body had become a shield, a living testament to love and protection that no bullet could penetrate fully. Elena's tears fell freely onto his bloodied shoulder. "Please, Alexander, don't leave me." He managed a faint, strained smile, whispering against the chaos and pain, "I'm not going anywhere." Not this time, but his vision blurred further. The corridor swam in a haze of red lights and shadows, the sounds of alarms and shouted orders merging into a distant roar. The child stirred in Elena's arms, safe for the moment, yet the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to choke. Alexander's grip on consciousness slipped, a heavy weight dragging him downward, even as his instinct to protect refused to release the boy. And then, in the chaos of the hospital, surrounded by sirens, flashing lights, and shouts of medical staff, the world went black. Elena's scream pierced the air as she cradled their son, looking down at Alexander's unconscious form. The enemy was still there, lurking in the shadows, and the question that burned through her mind was clear: can he survive long enough to save them all? Or has his past finally claimed its ultimate price? Alexander Hale woke to the sterile scent of antiseptic, the hum of machines, and the faint, rhythmic beeping of monitors. The world felt heavy, his body weighted by pain, blood loss, and exhaustion. Every muscle ached, but consciousness had returned, and with it, the sharp edge of awareness he had spent years cultivating in Chicago's underworld. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the pale light that streamed through the hospital blinds. For a moment, He thought he was alone, a brief, disorienting lapse into memory and shadows. Then he felt it. The warmth beside him, a presence both terrifying and grounding. Elena Carter. She sat quietly, her posture rigid yet calm, a silent sentinel over him. In her arms, their son slept, fragile and innocent, oblivious to the chaos that had erupted just hours before. Every heartbeat of the child reminded Alexander of everything he had lost, everything he had abandoned, and everything he still had a chance to protect. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air was thick with tension, relief, and the weight of unspoken emotions. Years of anger, pain, and longing hung between them like a fragile bridge. Alexander's piercing blue eyes, still sharp beneath the shadow of fatigue, traced the contours of her face, the lines of worry softened by the gentle curve of her lips, the hardened edges now tempered by care for their son. Finally, Elena's voice broke the silence. Low, calm, yet carrying the weight of everything she had endured. "You saved him," she said, her gaze shifting to the sleeping child. "And I don't know how to hate you for that." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. A mixture of relief, guilt, and longing surged within him. He lowered his head briefly, voice hoarse and raw as he replied, "I can't undo the past, but give me a future to fight for." Elena studied him intently, her eyes searching his, reading the pain, the regret, and the determination. Hope flickered, delicate yet undeniable. For the first time since their separation, there was a tangible sense of possibility, something beyond revenge, betrayal, and survival. "You get one chance, Alexander," she said, her voice firm. "Only one. Don't destroy it." He nodded, gripping her hand, feeling the pulse of life, trust, and tentative connection in her touch. In that grip, he understood the stakes. Not the empire, not the power, but the family he had once abandoned and now had the chance to protect. "For you both," Alexander whispered, voice gaining strength. "I'll burn every enemy, every lie, every shadow standing between us." Elena's lips curved slightly, the faintest hint of a smile, tempered with relief and residual caution. The world had been cruel, unforgiving, but here, in this fragile bubble of recovery, there was hope. He looked down at his son, tiny fingers curling around Elena's, and felt a surge of fierce protectiveness unlike anything he had ever known. This child was his blood, his consequence, and now his reason. Time seemed to stretch, allowing them a brief moment of peace. Alexander leaned back, eyes closing briefly, savoring the quiet before the storm inevitably returned. Then, the subtle hum of a car engine outside caught his attention. His instincts, honed over years of power and violence, flared instantly. Danger was never far behind, and his past always had a way of crashing into the present. Elena noticed the shift in him, her hand tightening over his. "What is it?" she asked, voice low, caution lacing every word. He opened his eyes slowly, gazing toward the window. Shadows moved with deliberate precision across the parking lot. Even in his weakened state, Alexander recognized the warning signs. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. Before he could step out of bed, a sleek black car slid silently to a stop in front of the hospital entrance. The engine was quiet, the vehicle exuding the presence of calculated intent. A window rolled down slowly. A familiar, chilling voice whispered his name, dripping with menace and knowledge, "Alexander Hale." "We know about the boy." Alexander's jaw tightened. His grip on Elena's hand became a vice. Every instinct screamed that the war he had thought was over, the war for his empire, for revenge, for survival, was far from finished. Now, the stakes were higher. Now, they were personal. Elena glanced at him, eyes wide, understanding the unspoken truth. This was no ordinary threat. Whoever had sent the message knew exactly what they were targeting: the son, the future, the fragile hope they had begun to reclaim. Alexander pushed himself upright in the hospital bed, determination flashing in his blue eyes. Pain and exhaustion blurred the edges of his body, but his mind sharpened, calculating every move, every possibility, every angle of survival and retribution. "Get ready," he whispered to Elena, voice low and deadly. "They've come for more than me this time, and I won't let them take what's ours." Outside, the black car's engine purred like a predator stalking prey. Alexander's gaze hardened. He had rebuilt his strength, his resolve, and his purpose. This was not just a battle for his son's safety, it was a reckoning. The enemies who had haunted him, the shadows he had left behind, and the empire he had fought to protect all converged in this moment. The hospital lights flickered, casting long shadows through the ward. Alexander rose from the bed with grim determination. Elena gathered her son close, her courage mirroring his own. Together, they were no longer just survivors, they were a force the underworld could not ignore. The car door opened slowly, deliberate, a shadow emerging that promised a storm of vengeance, deceit, and danger. Alexander stepped toward the window, eyes blazing. He knew the battle ahead would test every skill, every instinct, and every shred of humanity he had left. "Hold on," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Because the war is just beginning." The figure from the car leaned forward, voice calm, cold, and unmistakably familiar. "Alexander Hale. Consider this your last warning. The boy is ours. Come alone or lose everything." The night air thickened. The city lights reflected off the hospital walls, rain beginning to streak down the windows. Alexander's hand clenched into a fist. Every choice, every action, every ounce of power he possessed would be tested, and in that instant, one truth was undeniable. The man who had once walked away had returned not just as a Mafia king, but as a father, a protector, and a force determined to reclaim what he had lost, no matter the cost.